and just recognizing what the scripture actually says about those that God places his affection on and has said, you are my child, I love you. In Romans 9, we know that, he has chosen us before the beginning of time. We did not say, I think I want a little bit of God in my life. We were running from him and he had to pursue us. And so that whole idea of like, he loves me as much on my worst day when I'm not performing, when I'm not showing love towards him or his people, when I am listening to Toto instead of to, Twyla Paris. Okay, so he still loves me. And so that has been a huge thing for me, and how freeing to know that I can rest in his love and I am perfectly loved. And as a result, I can walk that out and I can love others with the overflow of the love that he's given me.
Hey, look out. It's Faith Talk Today. I'm Rick Probst. Hope you're having a wonderful weekend. We certainly are. And what makes it better? Icing on the cake. Yeah, our favorite guest is with us, Lisa Anderson, host of the Boundless Show and director of young adults at Focus on the Family. Lisa, how are you?
I am doing well, and I'm so grateful to be your favorite guest, though I find that incredibly suspicious, so I'm going to have to check, but I'm going to ride that for right now.
Now, no doubt, because you are a favorite guest, we get a discount on any Lisa Anderson books or any merch that we might delve into.
Yeah, my wide array of merch, which consists of about 1.5 items right now, are entirely on sale at boundless.org. So, but I mean, pretty much a deep discount for you, Rick, for sure.
Thank you very much. Hey, you're going to want to listen to the Boundless Show. You can listen at Faith Talk Atlanta, or you can listen to the podcast. I was listening to the April 11th Boundless Show podcast, and I want to talk a little bit about that. I know Lisa wants to talk about dating, and specifically, should women ask men or should a woman ask a man for a date? We'll get into that in a second. But I did notice, I had never seen this before. And each time before we sit down together, I do my homework about you. But I found some things that I didn't realize. Maybe they're fresh on the website. I don't know. It says you love pastries. I did find out that you were a flute player for about maybe 16 years. Maybe you don't play anymore. And you love, is it chicken tikka masala? What is that?
So true. That's an Indian dish. Actually, it's now apparently, I heard this from a relatively reliable source, that in England, it has now become the official dish. It has overtaken fish and chips. But yeah, chicken tikka masala. It's like a chicken in a creamy sauce. A lot of spices. So big fan of that. And of course it goes well with pastries. So why not? I used to put on there that I enjoyed running, but I never enjoyed running, Rick. That was a lie. I just did it because I ate pastries. And now I've, in my advanced age, I'm having to find alternatives. So there you have it.
I love that. Yes, I agree. I used to be a marathoner, and because I ate pastries and tikka masala, probably. So, well, cool. And I know you're going on a cruise here pretty soon. We'd love to catch up with you when you get back to see if what you had to eat. Would you eat anything different on a cruise than you would normally?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's the best thing about cruising, is because it's all inclusive. You can try all these things with no risk. You're just like, it's just crazy town. And quite frankly, I do try a lot of new things because I, for the most part, hate cooking. And so I have a repertoire of about 7 items here at home that I just go through because I don't have the skills to branch out from that. And so cruising is awesome. I try things from all the world's cuisines. And if I don't like it, I'm just like, nah, I'm going to try something else. Or sometimes I just go and I get ice cream and that's my dinner because you know what? I'm on vacation.
Well, good for you. That's what cruises are for, to let your hair down. Hope you have a great time. Hey, the Boundless Show has been around for 25 years. You can find out more about the Boundless Show at boundless.org. You can also pick up Lisa's book, The Dating Manifesto. And rumor has it there's going to be a Dating Manifesto 2. We'll have to see if that's really true. Not sure. But all right, when we did some prep, and I do want to ask you about a number of things. Let's talk about the dating thing, and then we'll get into what I heard on the April 11th show of the Boundless Show, which I want to talk about. All right, here we are, the 21st century. Lisa, help me here. Should a woman ask a man for a date? Is that okay? Is that biblically sound? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, this is funny because this is a question we get at Boundless a lot. And you would think, I mean, there are people who've listened to Boundless and, of course, people at church and elsewhere who are like, no, that's like you're sinning if you're a woman and you ask a guy out on a date. And so, as you alluded to, Rick, times have kind of changed. And so I don't know. I mean, in my Bible, if I open it up, I can't find first and second dating where it tells me, that I can't ask a guy out. That said, whenever I counsel women, I always say, okay, so let's say that it's okay for women to ask men out on dates, no big deal, whatever. But I think you have to think ahead and use wisdom as to what are you asking for? Because I know for a fact that I have friends of mine who are married who are upset that their husbands can't even pick pizza toppings for when they order a pizza. And they're frustrated by that. And then they're like, well, what in the world? When did he get so indecisive? And I'm like, well, how was he when you were dating? And she's like, well, I made most of the decisions, but that was great because I got my way. And I'm like, okay, well, first of all, if you're going to date passive and lame, you're going to marry passive and lame. So you have to be willing. And I'm not saying, my sister, for example, Rick, she had to move the needle with my brother-in-law because he only talked about sports and just saw her as a friend. And she's like, this is a colossal waste of my time because I hate sports. So either you're going to actually show some interest in me or we're moving on. And so, so she had to kind of push the envelope a little bit and be like, what is this? What are we doing? Are you actually going to ask me on a date? And then he's like, oh, I guess so. Okay, whatever. But that said, you need to see if you ask a guy on a date, is he ever going to show leadership? Is he going to turn the tables and be like, okay, let me take the lead here a little bit. And so that's where I tell women, it's, and especially online, a lot of women feel powerless. Like if they can't reach out and do something, what are they doing? And so they feel frustrated and they say, well, I just want to ask, or I want to say something, or I want to know. And I'm like, that's fine. As long as you're okay with knowing the answer, because I don't know, you should tell me your opinion, Rick. Don't you feel like if a guy is interested in a girl, somehow he will let her know that? Like he's going to find some way to show his interest at some point. I don't know.
I would think so. Of course, I'm from the old school. So yeah, there is a little bit of communication there that you are, of course, interested and that you want to know what, depending on the gender, of course, for me and my wife, we talked about what I wanted to talk about. We talked about what she wanted to talk about. And we found that we both had similar likes and dislikes, and we just had fun together. And so, it grew from there. What is it, do you think? And let me reset a second here. Lisa Anderson from the Boundless Show with us. We're talking about dating. Then we're going to move into, I really want to talk to her about the Boundless April 11th show. And by the way, you can listen to Lisa at Faith Talk Atlanta. And Lisa is also on staff at Focus on the Family, Director of Young Adults. She knows what she's talking about. We've talked to her many times, and you'll want to check out boundless.org. Lisa, why is it? Maybe I know the answer to this question, but I want to hear it from you. Why is it specifically women? If women, they are with a young man, and like your brother-in-law, for instance, did your sister not pick up that's what was going to happen if they eventually tied the knot, that he'd be talking about sports and pretty much what he wanted to talk about? Why is it that women won't say, wait a minute, maybe I need to stretch him now? He's going to change, and he's not going to change, right? He's not going to change after they get married. Yeah. So why is that? Is it I need to strike now because the iron seems to be hot. What's the deal?
Yeah, I think she saw potential in him and saw other things. Now, he was just a precious farm boy, from northern Minnesota who hadn't dated much, if at all. And so she kind of saw him as, malleable, I think. And it is true. Like, there are things that they now share, like common interests, that are great, not sports. He's still into sports and she's not, so they have to go their own ways on that, but other commonalities, and certainly, a love for the Lord and all of that. So, but she had to decide, like, do I want to take the chance on this guy? Do I want to invest in him? Is there more there? And so she decided that she was going to open up that conversation and ask. She wasn't even sure, really, Rick, if he was interested in her or if he was just looking for a pen pal, because she went from the Midwest out to Seattle to school, and they were just kind of writing letters back and forth. And then, that's when she was kind of like, are we just going to write about your sports teams for, the next 3 decades, or what are we doing? So she realized she had to bring something up at that point. Otherwise, ditch him and find someone else. So
now, how are they doing today? Do they have a family? How long have they been married?
Yeah, so she's one of my older sisters. So she's now been married a couple decades, and they are doing well. They have 2 grown kids. And so they've definitely become more, I don't know, it's kind of that thing. People become a little more like each other, I think, after marriage. And I don't want to offend her and say they start looking like each other, but yeah, no, they're doing well. They made it work, but there are still many things, interests that they don't share. And so they just have to figure out what that is.
Lisa Anderson, the host of the Boundless Show. Right now we're talking about dating, and we're even touching on marriage. Lisa, years ago, we were on staff at a church in San Diego, and there was a young couple, precious couple. And I'm trying to remember how long they'd been married, just maybe 2 years, maybe 3, possibly. Then the child question came up, and she did not want children, and he wanted children. And my thought was, you didn't talk about this while you were dating? Is that crazy?
Absolutely, that needs to be talked about while you're dating. I think so many couples make assumptions or overlook conversations that end up being pretty big sticking points after they get married. And so kids is definitely one, especially now where fewer young adults are wanting kids.
Yeah.
I think that I just read something yesterday that it's like the average couple now is having 1.2 children or something. I mean, that's a record low for our nation, actually, at this point. And so that's a conversation you have to have. I would say also another one that's similar is worship preferences, or you and I have talked about denominational differences or doctrinal differences. If it matters to you where you're going to go to church, what style you're going to worship in, if your kids are going to Christian school or public school, all that kind of stuff, you're going to get into some pretty big fights over that if you don't settle some of those preferences on the front end.
It's almost, Lisa, isn't it, that, and I hate to sound so sterile, but it's almost like you have a list of the top 20 questions you need to ask, and you've got to decide, is 19 out of 20 okay? Is 15 out of 20 okay? Well, right?
Yeah. I mean, definitely non-negotiables that have to be in place. And then beyond that, that's just a great way to spend some of your time dating and in engagement, is going through some of these questions. I always feel like, I'm a fan of pre-engagement counseling. A lot of people wait until premarital counseling to fan of actually doing pre-engagement counseling. And then there are some question books out there, or articles. I know Desiring God has a great set of questions from John Piper for couples. Norm Wright wrote a book on questions. I think it's 101 questions to ask before you get engaged. So there are great ways to go after some of that information.
Good stuff. Lisa Anderson with us, the host of the Boundless Show. You can go to boundless.org to find out more. Hear the show at Faith Talk Atlanta, or go listen to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And by the way, we are lengthening the interview with Lisa. She's allowed us to do that because we have so much more that we'd like to talk about. And you can hear the entire interview on our podcast, faithtalkatlanta.com. So do that if you will. All right, April 11th. And I've told you this before. I mean, I love the content. I mean, it's more or less for folks younger than I am, although there are older folks that listen, like me, to the Boundless Show. So I enjoy not only the content, but of course just the topics, well, that would be content, but just the production of it is a well done show. There was a number of things that you talked about. You talked about Toto being the song that you wouldn't pass on if you heard it either on your Spotify or on the radio, that you would have to listen. That's one song you'll not shut off. Why is that?
Yeah, I think just because of the nostalgia factor. So when we're not talking about like heavy faith issues or culture or how in the world can you pick someone to marry that you can ultimately live with for the rest of your life, we like to talk about favorite songs and just some other fun stuff. And so for me, Toto's Africa, that song in particular, is just something that like brings me back to, I think in my case, probably early middle school when that came out, or late elementary school. And I remember riding the school bus and hearing that come on. And so we all kind of picked, of course, now the other folks on my show picked something from like 3 years ago because they're all like 12, so
Right.
But for me, that 1980s stuff is super fun, very nostalgic, and it just immediately transports you back. Most people can think of like where they were when they first heard certain songs, or if it has a memory attached to it. So that's a very fun one for me. I don't know. What's yours, Rick?
Well, you asked me this yesterday to think about it, and that's a hard one. It's hard to pin just one. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm an old rocker, so 60s, 70s music. So I would say if it's an Eagles song, probably I'll just keep it on, even though I've heard it a thousand times, but it just depends. Lisa Anderson with us. And you mentioned the panel, and I love that you do this with a panel. And, the folks that you had on the panel were younger folks. I could tell by their song preferences, their style.
Yeah.
And so probably close to what my oldest son would be, maybe even my youngest son, possibly. But it's interesting how you brought up a topic about music. And back in the day, I was not raised in church, but back in the day, you only listened to Christian music. And it wasn't until years later, I've been following Jesus probably about 41 years. I would say about 20 years ago, I said, wait a minute, there's more than just the Imperials. Help us. So, and I know that, for me, I'm not going to go listen to death metal. That's just not my thing. But I love how you created a setting where people were honest. Those guys were honest. I believe it was two girls and a guy. Maybe it was two guys and a girl. I can't remember. But they were honest about their preferences and how it made them feel. And I think the show, it gave me a whole perspective, not just I'm going to put in quotes, a Christian perspective.
Right. Yeah. And that's because, I mean, I don't know that there are many of us who would say, I will never let a secular song touch my ears. So we are trying to be real of just the space that we live in and how we curate playlists, what that looks like. In fact, I've talked on the show before about how one of my favorite genres, Rick, is hip hop.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that for me to find hip hop music that is, that I can listen to without having to specifically, I'll have to get the cleaned up versions or whatever. I remember I purchased a few of them on my playlists, and then I'm like, over half of the words were bleeped out. So I was like, this isn't even a song anymore. So I have to just kind of get rid of that one. but it's just a fun thing. And so in that, there are some hip hop tunes that are more just fun. There are hip hop Christian artists that I found that are great, that are great alternatives. And so we just try to put it out there. But conversely, to your point, there are some great songwriters that have been, around for decades in various genres and, general market, like secular artists who have written great stuff. I always say, I can't remember if we talked about this on the show, but whenever I'm asked for like just a great lyric, I always bring up out of from Paul Simon that opening line to Graceland is, the Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar. And I mean, what a word picture. And so God has gifted artists who aren't even, who aren't believers in him. And hopefully someday they will be. But all truth is God's truth and all beauty is God's beauty.
See, that's why we love you so much, Lisa. Lisa Anderson, the host of the Boundless Show. We could talk music all day. Let's do this. I want to move into this because I know you have to go and do your real job, your day job. Let's talk about the life-changing moments of Lisa Anderson. You shared that on your podcast, and at one point you said moments. At one moment you said life-altering, which I thought well described all of us, right? But specifically the things that you shared. And I loved what you shared, that you were very candid about, of course, your dad's passing, dealing with your mom, as she got older. And also you talked about, and I don't remember if this was in the same, at the same time frame when you shared this, but you talked about learning how to love and not white knuckling it. And that really stood out to me because I wanted to pick your brain on that. But let's talk about life altering events in your life. Was that difficult to share, or is that something you've done before?
It wasn't difficult for me to share. I've actually thought about this quite a bit because I have a small group of women that I mentor, mostly in their 20s and 30s. And so we've talked about this. This was actually a listener question that came into Boundless, which I'm more like, oh my goodness, have I actually gotten that old that people like look at me some kind of like sage of like, Lisa, tell us about your life. So I had to reconcile that. I keep thinking I'm everyone's peer and I'm not. Okay. So can we be honest about that? That said, it wasn't totally hard. I actually had to, it was a great exercise for me to think that through, just because I've talked about this in a few other different contexts, and other people have too. I know there's a Beth Moore study out there where she references these in terms of God stops. What are those places in your life where God has just shown up that were pivotal to you, that had an effect on your faith? And, there's another friend of mine is going through a thing called Healing Journey, where they have to go back through life's painful events and put the gospel on them in order to explain them and get healing and all that. So it's a good exercise. But yeah, for me, I mean, again, it was a little bit different for me, Rick, in that because I was the youngest of 6 kids, my parents were older. And so I had to reconcile and I had to walk through their deaths earlier than most of my peers. And so I think not only losing them, but also doing it at such a young age for the most part was a pivotal thing for me. And recognizing not even the loss, because they both loved the Lord. And I know that they're totally cool. They're with the Lord, they're chilling, they're loving it, whatever. But for me, it was the reconciling that I was now functionally an orphan. And what did that mean with my biological family? And what does it mean? What does God say about us being orphans and us being adopted into his family? And so that was a huge learning for me to walk through that. And then the faith stuff, that like what you said about love. I mean, I grew up, and I tell this, I don't think my parents would mind me saying this, but because they love Jesus. My parents had been missionaries before I was born. My dad was a pastor, but just that Christian ecosystem that we grew up in was very much like everything from, don't drink, don't dance, don't play cards. Maybe you can play Uno, but that's very dangerous. All of that. I still remember conversations with my dad that I'm just like, Lord, I hope you guys are laughing about this up there, because I'm going to laugh when I get up, see him again. So there was like, let's, for lack of a better term, say some legalism, even though I never felt my parents were hypocritical at all. But then also this idea that we saw in the church, for decades, and I think it's still in the church, of this idea of like, God did so much for you. What do you owe him? Kind of this idea of making our faith transactional, and this idea of like, God is, I'm sure he was happy to save me, but now I have to spend the rest of my life making him glad that he did. Okay. So that kind of idea of like, I don't want him to be disappointed in me. I want God to feel like he did a good thing and I was worth his while, and just recognizing what the scripture actually says about those that God places his affection on and has said, you are my child, I love you. In Romans 9, we know that, he has chosen us before the beginning of time. We did not say, I think I want a little bit of God in my life. We were running from him and he had to pursue us. And so that whole idea of like, he loves me as much on my worst day, when I'm not performing, when I'm not showing love towards him or his people, when I am listening to Toto instead of to, Twyla Paris. Okay. So he still loves me. And so that has been a huge thing for me, and how freeing to know that I can rest in his love and I am perfectly loved. And as a result, I can walk that out and I can love others with the overflow of the love that he's given me.
Well said. And the other is exhausting. So thank you. We had
Absolutely.
a chat yesterday, and we talked a little bit about, and this is for another show, about Reformation and the book you read that really kind of changed your, in a sense, moved you a little more towards grace, I guess. But yesterday, you said something about Romans 9. Well, I went back this morning and looked at freshly, as freshly as I could, Romans chapter 9. And it's something that we all need to do. We need to go back and look. Of course, you've got Romans 8, which is the classic chapter, right? Which is very marked up in my Bible. 9, not so much.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back in 9, and I'm going to stay in 9 for a while and see what's happening. So thank you for your influence. Thank you for your life. You touch so many lives, not only on the Boundless Show, but you are one that disciples so many people throughout your own personal life off the air. And we appreciate that. Thanks for spending so much time with us. We want them to check out boundless.org. Also listen to the show at Faith Talk Atlanta, or wherever you get your podcast. You can listen to the Boundless Show. And then when you get back from your cruise, we'd like to talk to you about the cruise and maybe some Reformation stuff, because I have a lot of questions about that, and I think you may have the answers. Lisa, thank you so much. We love you. We appreciate all that you do. Hey, that's it for this Faith Talk today. Again, you can listen to the entire interview on our podcast, faithtalkatlanta.com, and we will catch up with Lisa again. Ezra Ortiz, thank you for producing this show. Where would I be without you? Well, I wouldn't be here. I'd be somewhere else probably, but thank you for keeping me on task. And all of you have a great week. We'll see you next week. I'm Rick Probst. See ya.